Welcome to Bold Agendas, a series of thought leadership podcasts dedicated to the discussion of transformation management. In each podcast, we discuss a topic of strategic interest to business leaders who are guiding their organizations through transformative change. Career resilience is often linked to stronger job performance, higher job satisfaction, and a deeper commitment to the organization. Beyond just routine tasks, empowering employees at an individual level fosters creativity, collaboration, and builds a foundation of trust in leadership. When authority is delegated, input is encouraged, and autonomous decision-making is promoted, the workplace becomes an environment of continuous learning, innovation, and teamwork. As AI and other advanced technologies continue to evolve, employees must be equipped to navigate and contribute to a dynamic business landscape. A well-designed employee experience not only models the future of work, but helps both employees and leaders embrace new practices and develop the skills needed for future success. To that end, I'm privileged to welcome Natalie Wintermark. Natalie is the Chief People and Culture Officer at Glamox AS, one of the world's leading lighting companies. She has more than 20 years of international experience in strategic HR, business transformation, and talent development in major companies. With her background in integrating advanced technologies with strategic HR practices, she is dedicated to enhancing workforce management and cultivating progressive organizational cultures. Currently, as the Chief People and Culture Officer at Glamox, she leads initiatives that blend human-centric insights with technological innovations to foster adaptive, future-ready workplaces. This will be an insightful discussion on evolving trends in HR practices, and I'm grateful to have Natalie here to share her expertise and ideas. I'm Mimi Brooks. I'm the CEO of Logical Design Solutions, a business strategy and transformation consultancy, and I'm a leadership coach. And today we're going to focus on a CHRO's view of the circular economy of people. Let's get started. Natalie, welcome to Bold Agendas, and thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate your time, especially coming in from Norway in your evening. So thank you for accommodating us. Good to see you.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Natalie, I want to tell our guests by way of introduction that a lot of the folks that come on my podcast, I know them from prior work or in the industry. And you and I just met because of the podcast. My producer found you, I think, because of the speaking that you did at Unleash. So this is a real treat for me to get you on, because I think that the work that you're doing as a CHRO, we'll talk about the company and its mission in just a moment, is going to be so helpful for our audience, many of whom are CHROs themselves. So thanks for coming on a bit blind, not knowing me or our purpose prior, but I'm delighted to have you here.
Well, thank you so much. It's a real pleasure to be invited and to speak on your show.
You know, one of the things that I was so, and I told you this when I met you online before the call, that I was just so enthralled with your company. So Glamox was not a firm that I was familiar with. I'm going to let you tell people about them in just a moment. So the company and its mission and its own digital transformation that it's been adapting to in the marketplace and some of the progress made so far, you know, is just such a great thing to see in terms of greasing the skids for the HR agenda that follows. So between the mission of the organization and its purpose, your CEO, who I think is really quite dynamic, it's a fun company to learn about. And I'm going to pause for a moment and let you talk about the company, introduce them to people, because I'm not sure that it would be, you know, quite as obvious in terms of what Glamox does, and maybe some of the background and the current information around digital transformation and the energy transition that they've been responding to.
Sure, I can say a bit about that. So I work for Glamox, as you said, international company based out of Norway. We employed a little over 2,000 people. And, you know, we create light for a better life. That's our mission and our motto. So we're headquartered, as I said, out of Oslo. We're B2B, so it's you won't find our lighting in hardware stores. And we have two main markets. So we provide energy efficient LED lighting, which is connected to smart. It's for professional commercial buildings in Europe. So we're talking now about offices, professional buildings, commercial buildings, mostly in Europe. Also factories, schools, universities, even hospitals. In operating rooms, for example, you'll see our luminaires. And what we provide can save up to 90% electricity compared to conventional lighting. So that's our energy efficiency there. And secondly, we also provide efficiency LED lighting for the marine, offshore, and wind markets. And those are some of the world's most environmentally friendly car carriers to lighting offshore with wind farms. So really, we're really looking at lighting is part of the revolution in terms of the wind industry. So that's where we are in the
I
market.
love that. And, the company was founded in 1947, so
Yeah.
it's been around a bit. But, the thing that really drew me initially was the purpose statement of the business. I just want to share it really quickly because I think it says a lot about, who you are and what you do. And as I said, greases the skids to HR. So, industrial lighting company providing sustainable lighting solutions that improve performance and the well-being of people. So you've
Yeah.
got this people-centric context of the organization, as well as the positioning, of the sustainability play, such a big idea now. So I imagine the combination of those two things, really differentiates you from being a products company, if you will.
Yes, absolutely. So you're right. We have the two sides, right? Because in terms of moving forward with the digital side, and it's all about the people, really. You don't have the if you don't have the right people, you can't move forward. But also we do a lot in terms of, for example, we follow the Circadian system, right? Which means that basically we want to have in office buildings, for example, light that follows a bit the lighting during daytime, and that will help you, gain better sleep, gain better health. So those are all really important things that we're looking into.
I love that. I love that. So before we get into HR's agenda, let me just get a couple more company context on the table that I think will be relevant. Can you give us just a bit of an understanding of your workforce? What kind of jobs are these folks in? So what are the segments of people that comprise the workforce? And what has the company been doing already in digital transformation and getting the organization ready for a new marketplace?
Yes, those are really important and pertinent questions. So we are centered around manufacturing and office workers. So about half of our workforce is in manufacturing. So we have a few factories around the world and around Europe. And secondly, we have our workforce, which is a lot of people who are sales oriented, so selling to the businesses, but also, R&D departments looking into, really the digital future, which is all centered around LED lighting and looking into smart solutions, which also, in the end, look into the efficiency of our lighting systems.
So really more, I mean, if we called them, lighting platforms or lighting
Yeah,
solutions versus lighting products, that's probably
correct.
a right way to think about it in terms of how you go to
Absolutely.
market. Yeah, I love that too.
Absolutely.
Okay, great. So with that as kind of the backdrop, let's talk about how you operationalize an HR agenda to really father and enable the business strategy. So let me start with your relationship with the CEO. So, what does she rely on, HR and your team to deliver relative to new value?
Oh, that's such a good question. And I'm extremely lucky to have a CEO that really understands the HR agenda. First of all, she's made sure that HR sits at the table. So I'm part of the leadership team, which means that I have a very important role to play in terms of how our people are influencing the future of our agenda. We have something called the green light strategy, and we have five pillars, and one of which is, of course, looking at digital and the future of digital and how we're integrating that in the business. But one of the main five pillars is also the people agenda, so people and leadership. And And that says a lot about the direction in which we're going. Another thing that she's done that's super important is that she talks a lot about, and this is so integrated in the what I call the circular economy of people, is she talks about the AAA. And what the AAA is, when we hire people, and the people that we have in the company should have 3 A's, which are attitude, which is basically, looking at what are people adapt to change? Are people wanting to, do they just basically have the right attitude for the future? And a lot of that has to do, with change and with how we work. And then adaptitude. So, do we have people that are quick enough to learn new skills, to understand new business models, to work with them, to change, because the rate of change is unprecedented, and we know that, and that's even been exponentially increasing with the arrival of AI and adaptive AI. And last but not least, the aptitude. And that has to do with, of course, the skills that you have and being able to, you have to start at the core with the right skills, but skills are really changing, and they're changing extremely quickly. So those are the sort of things that she talks about, which are really key to the people agenda, but also to moving the company forward, because we know that without the people, we're really going nowhere.
I find it quite interesting too. So I love that. I find it interesting that aptitude is third on the list and attitude is first on the list. So it tells you a little bit about these ideas of, changing ways of working, right? And the importance of them. So I love that. I want to just hang for 1 minute, if I can, on this issue of having a seat at the table. This is a big issue for HR people, yes, right? And ensuring that, we're really able to be at the table, peer to peer, with the BU heads and the other senior leadership team with a voice. Yeah.
I think that's so extremely important, because one thing that I didn't mention that she's also done is ensure that HR is in the right discussion. So when we're talking about, for example, the blueprint of the organization or the org model, HR is present. And even more so, I wouldn't say HR is leading it, because obviously business development and the leads are the ones that are really making the decisions. But we are there to make sure we're asking the right questions.
Yeah.
And that is really key to building. And this is where I think the difference between, the old, or I want to say a little bit the old-fashioned HR that comes in after the fact and executing, versus HR that is really strategic partners in the business decisions. Exactly. So that has been super important and very key to the role that I have and that my team has.
So just to do a follow-up on that real quick, because I know this is a topic of importance to our CHRO audience. So when you initially took that position in that role, how would you describe that your influence has evolved, over some period of time? So what's been the transition from having a seat at the table, literally, to being able to influence, outcomes and decisions? Is there a way that you would see that as it started looking like this, and over time I was able to build credibility and trust, and now the relationship looks more like that? Was it a transition?
I think that's a really important question. So I've been in the role for about 1.5 years. So in terms of, I would say that when the CEO anchors your role, that's already the biggest step. And I think that from there, of course, I've had to show credibility, and that's really key. So I have a background in management consulting. So I think that has helped in terms of being able to have those business discussions and asking the right question. And, are we thinking of efficiencies? Are we thinking of, okay, you want to hire a new role. Are you sure that role doesn't exist somewhere else? Can we shift? Just in terms of bringing new thinking, right? Can we train someone into being in that role? Can we throw someone into the deep water? Because too often, we don't dare to give someone that boost. And they may sink or they may float, but sometimes it's worth, taking that risk. And so in order to be able to ask all those right questions, then we're able to get to the right outcome. But I'd say that building the credibility is really important. I think that by showing some sort of expertise in the area, that always helps in terms of getting credibility. But first and foremost, at every leadership meeting, HR has a point on the agenda. And that says more about my CEO giving me credibility than about maybe myself creating that credibility. So I think it goes both and. She makes sure that that's anchored. She talks about HR agendas, but then I am there to also gain the credibility by talking about the right things. And first and foremost, not only about talking about the execution. I think that that's maybe one of the mistakes that some CHROs might make is only coming in after the fact and talking about, for example, we need to talk with the unions and have the right social plans in place if we lay off, for example.
Yeah.
As opposed to, yes, but I need to be in the team that is looking into how we are reorganizing the company, right? So those sorts of conversations need to happen at the top.
It sounds like the skill set, you tell me if I'm hearing this right, it sounds like the skill set from a consulting perspective, having had a similar background or having a similar background to what you're describing, is this idea of how do we design the operating model, right? How do we all co-design the operating model in order to ensure that the business strategy is realizable? Like that's where you collaborate, right?
And that is absolutely the key, because way too often, not to sound too consultingly, but way too often we end up placing people in the positions by looking at the people. And really what we know is that if you follow the order of the business model, then the operating model and its value change, the roles will fall into place more or less on their own, because then you will have an idea of where you are trying to go. And that is why HR needs to be early on into those discussions to help with the operating model discussion, and then being able to say, okay, now we can fit those roles into place, and now we can have role descriptions in place and look at the gradings and look at all those things that are super important to the roles in themselves with the job descriptions, etc. But really, the discussion comes way before that. And if we come at the last minute and we're only shuffling around the people because we know Jeff, John, and Jerry, that doesn't necessarily work.
Yeah, it's top down, right? I mean, what you're advocating for is a top down approach. Let us affect the organization design in a macro sense,
Absolutely.
to make sure that when we get to the point of programs and people and rules and, now we're putting them into a system that was quite purposeful in terms of its design.
Correct.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, Natalie, related to this discussion, in terms of the operating model and in combination with digital transformation and the changing way that we do business as we become a digital enterprise, it seems to me that, a foundational idea are new relationships, much more so than new technology. I mean, there's new technology, but way before that, are new relationships and the exchanges of those relationships in our new operating model. So when we talk about businesses getting flatter, we mean more peer-to-peer relationships based on win-win ideas of give and take, exchanges, if you will. So relationships changing in the business environment seem to me to be a foundational kind of fundamental idea of what kind of business transformation is needed here. So on that basis, I want to ask questions about the changing nature of your relationships with people around the organization, starting with your constituents or business clients, the business units that you described before. How do you relate to them now that becomes so critical, in this realization of the business strategy that we were talking about?
Well, absolutely. And I think it's two things, right? As we are moving more from selling products to selling solutions, because that is the future of the digital transformation, you're right that it's also changing the way that we also work internally in terms of, solutions aren't, so when you sell a product, you can go on your own maybe and sell that product to the customer. But when you're starting to sell solutions, you really have to work across department and across businesses. And I think how that translates from an HR perspective and my role is that, I act very much in terms of, because there's a lot of new processes that we have to put in place, how we do performance management, how we grade our roles, all of those, general HR processes. But I also have to be essentially a very close HR business partner. and have close discussions with my peers. And this is again where the credibility that you were talking about earlier comes into play. Because am I able to really talk to them on a strategic level, or am I just lying a little bit behind in terms of processes?
Such an important point. I'm going to stay on this for a minute because I think that one of the discussions that comes up a lot with CHROs that we work with is the important and necessary idea of the changing role of the strategic HR business partners. And you know, Natalie, it seems to me, and I'm interested in your point of view, that what happened was, when we moved towards the structure of HR BPs, we intended them to be strategic partners, but in many cases they were operationalized as super generalists, our really best generalists, if you will. And then the nature of the relationship ended up being an HR operations relationship as opposed to a strategic fill in the blank, strategic workforce planning, for example, strategic consideration of how our jobs would be changing in the future, et cetera. So how are you approaching these critical roles in terms of business partners, finding the right people, retooling them, whatever it is that you're doing to get those roles to be the strategic consultants and partners to the business that we really need them to be now?
And I think this goes a lot back to the point that you were making earlier, which has to do with our CHRO. She sees first and foremost the importance of the HR business partners as strategic partners and the CHRO as a strategic partner. And that means that in the business, when she is talking that tone, and she sets the tone, of course, then we are sure that when the HR business partners come into conversations with our leaders, that they are not only talking about, executing a change in the organization or being very operational in that sense. They are also having the main discussion of, as I said, talking about the blueprint, talking about, how do we want our organizations to look? What is our, operating model going to look like? And how does that translate into our people? How does our org design look like? What is our span of control? So all of those questions become really important to the HR business partner. And that's how I think they become much more strategic. But really, at the end of the day, I think I owe it all to, having a CEO that really sets the tone and makes sure that our team has their seat at the table. Because way too many times, the HR partners just become very operational, either because that's their background as well.
Right.
Too often, you start as an HR manager, you're doing a lot of the operational things, and then you're moved into a strategic role, but that's maybe not your background or interest. So I think having also people that maybe have more of that strategic background could also help move the agenda forward. But nonetheless, I strongly believe that if you don't have a CE or CEO that really, really understands the strategic value of HR, it's going to be difficult.
What about how your relationship works and perhaps has evolved from prior CHROs in your role, since you've been there just for the year and a half, with your chief digital officer, and is there a relationship, that you have around trying to get digital transformation to be well balanced with organizational transformation? So how does that work, and how do those initiatives, if you will, those digital initiatives, get humanized?
Yeah, that's such an important question, but I think it really goes hand in hand, right? I think that in order to move towards a company that is more digital, you need to be able to change the operating model, change the way that you're working, right? Because, there are interesting statistics out there with regards to where companies have gone over time, right? For example, we know that 52% of companies in the Fortune 500 in 2003 no longer exist in 2024. And we also know that 88% of companies from the Fortune 500 from 1995 no longer exist. And why is that? That's because they weren't able to adapt to the change. And that's exactly what we're talking about when we talk about the digital transformation and the arrival of HR. We know, or of HR, sorry, the arrival of AI, right? We know that if companies don't adapt to that change, they will not survive.
Yeah.
And in order to survive, we have to have HR because it's all about the people at the end of the day. We see that AI is bringing on so much change so fast that we need to be able to, we can't switch out all the people that we have to be able to, and also because it's no longer a question of can we get people from outside that have this competency. It's new. We have to build the competency from within. We have to encourage people to build that competency and change the way that they're working. And when I think of HR roles now versus 5 years ago, I think that my role is completely different than it would have been 5 years ago. Because now we're looking at AI, we look at the way we work, we look at work efficiencies. We know that people can be extremely efficient through AI. And that just means that they're working differently. So all of those things means that those roles are changing.
So as the frontline organization to our relationship with our workers, employees, contract workers, you've got an interesting, diverse workforce given the size of the organization. So, given that HR is the face to our workers on the front line with our workers, and you've got a diverse workforce from your manufacturing employees, many of whom I believe are probably union represented employees. So that brings a different idea of relationship management, if you will, to the table. And then your sales folks and R&D and office workers. So even though the company at 2,000 plus employees isn't a huge footprint, you've got quite diversity in terms of, the workforce that, you need to engage. So my question is, in light of what you're describing, how has your relationship with workers changed or is in the process of changing? How do you engage them now in ways that, to your point, you might not have done a few years ago because it just wouldn't be relevant?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I would say that, with the AI revolution, there are roles that are changing a lot, and there are roles that are changing a lot less. And what we know is that, for example, roles such as electricians, which we work very closely with in the lighting industry, right? People that work in factories, laborers, machine operators, those sorts of jobs, they're not as much affected by AI. What they are affected by with the digital transformation is maybe the type of luminaires they would be working with, or working more with smart sensors now than they would have been in the past. But the nature of their role is not as exposed or changing as they would have done for other roles, which are more what we would normally call the white collar roles. And what we know is that the roles that are most effective by the AI transformation are roles like ours, right? In HR, in accounting, in payroll, in marketing, in finance, etc., especially in engineering. So those are roles that are really changing. And those are the ones that we have to adapt to in terms of how we're working. And like I said, when you go from selling products to selling more and more solutions, that is a completely new way of working. And I think that that's what's affecting them the most is the new value chain. You go from working in a certain way to working and relating to completely different people than what you're used to. And that's the transformation that we're focusing on most.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because sometimes it can seem like a subtle change to say we don't sell products, we sell solutions. But it's a massive different way of thinking about going to the market. And I think when you're talking frontline workers or manufacturing employees, certainly sales, suddenly things like customer centricity become everybody's concern, right? And if you're selling product and just thinking about my piece in the supply chain, those value props might, never really enter my thinking or even discussion in terms of what the business expects or asks of me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, don't misunderstand me, right? We're still very much selling products and retrofit and that sort of thing. But at the end of the day, you're right that if we want to upsell and if we want to be at the top game, then we do have to think differently. So that is definitely something that is requiring a new type of thinking. And what we've done a lot of in the organization is make sure that we match the experts to, for example, our sales force, to make sure that they are comfortable enough with talking about those new products or those new solutions that we have. Because the key is also, the comfort of the organization. And when we know that people don't like change, but at the end of the day, what they really don't like is the unknown. So the more we give them and the more we teach them, the better they become adapt to those changes.
Exactly, exactly. If I said it as, the business is trying to create new value in the marketplace. And so we need to have employees comfortable with their contribution to that. How do I, as an individual, or how do we as a team or organization contribute the new value proposition that aligns to, what we're trying to be and do out in the market? Yeah, it's a big idea. This concept, though, I want to switch us to this discussion of the circular economy. You mentioned it just a moment ago. I used it as the title of the show. I think it's a great concept. I hadn't really heard it referred to in this context before when we spoke about the idea. And I said, is there a link to the concept of the sustainability commitment that the business has to what you're trying to say about how people fit into this? And so I think that there's a kind of an interesting playthrough on that. But I want to stop and just let you talk me through what you mean when you say, the circular economy of people, and why this concept has become, in your mind, an important concept in terms of the HR agenda there.
Absolutely. So this is a topic that I'm very passionate about. And, I had heard so many times, and we all have, about sustainability and the circular economy. And what we know about the circular economy is basically, this idea that we have a product, we use it, and then we want to reduce the footprint. So we recycle, we reuse, and then that cycle continues, right? We produce based on, and what's really interesting is that, in our own company, the sustainability agenda is very much there. So, for example, we have some exciting products, like we worked on a luminaire that the lining also absorbs sounds, and that lining is made from recycled bottles, right? So that's very important. But then I started thinking, okay, what does that mean for our people? Because I think that, having worked also with L&D, with learning and development, what we really want to do is, like I said, we have more and more people that needs to be reskilled very fast, and the momentum of change is accelerating. So how do we do that? And part of how we've done that is, like I've said, we have the AAA, which is getting really exceptional talent. We want to work with a growth culture. So we want to make sure that people are really at the cutting edge of wanting to learn and wanting to do new things and wanting to upskill themselves. And we do that through making sure that we have the right approach to learning. And at the same time, we're working more and more towards the utilization of data analytics. So for example, we have a new HR system. We're looking at not only metrics, because way too many people look at only metrics thinking it's data analytics, but how do we really use those numbers to be able to move the business forward? And this again goes back to having HR partners that are really strategic and utilizing those numbers to really make analysis and really understand where the business is going.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. I mean, I feel like what you're saying there specifically is that, you're trying to turn the capability of having data analytics into an outcome of insights, of relevant business insights, right? And so that's probably one of the roles too that you'd like business partners to be able to do, right? Is to interpret those into relevant insights so that business leaders don't have to figure out what to do with this data. Like, what does it mean?
Absolutely. And that brings to the circular economy of people, right? Because when you start looking at how can we in the organization place people in the right roles, how can we make sure that they're a fit for those roles and ready, then that is what the circular economy of people is. Because again, we know that 48% of roles are going to change in terms of the skills that are needed to achieve their roles in the next 3 to 5 years. So how do we manage to that quickly get people on top? And how do we make sure that they're placed in the right areas?
It seems to me that just as a HR person by background, that when you're talking about the circular economy, it almost seems like a modern view of the employee life cycle. Could I say that?
Yeah.
Like it's a more modern view of how we think about the employee life cycle, kind of fit for this time, this place.
Absolutely. I think you're right on the ball on that one. It is. I think the difference is that it's happening a lot quicker than it used to be. And what I also think about is that because when you say that, that triggers also my thought that, historically, most companies were very keen on having career paths. And it's not that I'm against career paths. I think they're very fitting for a certain number of roles. However, more and more people are going to have to zigzag through their careers. They're going to have to take on roles and move sideways a lot more often than they probably used to do in the past. So, and that's why they have to be so much more adaptable and learn so much quicker. And that's also part of the circular economy of people. It's that you don't necessarily have a very linear path as you used to.
Yeah. I think that this to me seems like one of the biggest challenges for HR, Natalie. And it asks the question, what is the structure of work when the fluidity of work is going to be the way that work works going forward?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So, when we over-define roles and we over-specify skill sets in roles, unless there's, as you said, unless there's a clear defined, path of work that's relatively stable, which is not a lot of work now. This idea of how are organizations going to deliver, the reconstructed on the fly work that needs to happen, because that's what it is, right? It's reconstructed on the fly. I need to be able to pull a team of people together, with diverse skills and background, tightly aligned, hopefully, to the problem space. But then they're going to have to figure it out. And it's going to be a lot less about my individual specialty and much more about, how we can create solutions together. This fluidity in structure is going to be quite a challenge, I think. What do you think?
Oh, 100%. And so there's different parts to what you're saying, right? The one part is being able to learn on what I call on the moment of apply. When you need to apply a new skills, when you're there, how do you learn it right away? And I think that's such an important new wave into how we make people learn, right? It used to be that, you had a program, you took 6 months to build it, you would bring it to a pilot, you would adjust it, but things are moving so fast these days that by the time you're done these programs, 2 years have passed and they're outdated. So I'm not saying there's no room for these types of courses. There are, but more and more we need to be adaptive. And there's a lot of platforms that do this. I mean, one of them is Degreed, which I've implemented in a previous company, which I think looks at what are the skills that you need. It's a learning experience platform, and there's many of them out there. What are the skills that you need to build, as opposed to just looking at a role, but what are the skills for that role? How are you learning them? And then it suggests, so it's working on an AI-based platform, and it suggests new skills. And what it also does is it says, okay, what are the roles that I'm looking at for the future? And what are the skills that I would need for those roles? And how do I learn those skills? So those types of platform makes it very adaptive. And it's also what I call, the democracy of learning, because we are going to, in the future, need to be much more trusting of the employees to create their own path of learning and to really understand better. So HR needs to be the catalyst of how we are getting people there. But certainly we need to be able to say, okay, this is what you need to do yourself, and probably in collaboration with your manager, to be able to move to the future and to be able to get the roles that you want in the future.
I think you're also kind of bringing in a piece of this. Where does technology, HR technology, play as an enabler, right? And we know that it's not about the technology, it's about people in the context of strategy. But technology is an important enabler that philosophically aligns to your vision of where you think HR is going to be contributing value, is all part of the decision of what technology, when, and for what purpose, right? So if we thought
Excellent.
about that, I just want to touch on this just for a minute. If we thought about that as the HR platform that you're trying to construct, one of the challenges I think that we've had in HR in the past is that we could have been perhaps too much of a consumer of best of breed solutions. And we ended up in a really fractured, fragmented HR environment. You know what I mean when I say that, like tools and capabilities all over the place, and when we needed to put a unified platform capability, together and push it out front, we had problems doing that because we had stuff all over the place, and it changed by business unit sometimes in terms of apps and whatever. So could I just have you give me a couple of minutes on how you think about the strategy of HR technology and the platform for the overall employee worker experience that you either have or envision?
I think that is an extremely important question, and needs to be very forward thinking for the future of HR, because I think that is the direction in which we are going. And I think that brings me back to one of the points I was bringing with regards to the circular economy of people and the importance of data analytics. Because if we have fragmented systems, if we don't have, the right also user interface, and this is why I talked also about LXPs, learning experience platform, as opposed to the traditional LMS, learning management system, where do you just have a list of courses? The main difference is the utilization of AI in these systems, and also the fact that, you can really use data analytics and the user experience, which is key. Because what you really want is, if you have a group of separate systems, and payroll doesn't link to your HR system, and your skills don't link to your learning platform, and you're not going to be able to have a proper user experience, and you're not going to be able to join your workforce together to be able to utilize it. So there's both the utilization of the workforce, but also how HR utilizes these systems to be able to make the proper decisions and strategic decisions that need to be made. And that goes both from the learning aspect, but also from the people aspect. So, if you think of an HR system, if you can't link performance management to salary data, to skills, then you're going to have issues in order to implement the future of people.
Yeah, this is where I feel like these challenges, of the business, the table stakes idea of interoperability and simplification, become important pillars in HR strategy as well, right? We've got to be able to simplify the ecosystem. It's got to be interoperable so that we have continuous, I'll call them programs, because sometimes they're processes, but that gets us down a bit into the minutia. It's really a question of whether the programs that we're putting in front of our constituents, whoever they are, workers, our HR professionals, et cetera, whether, they are reasonably, logically seamless, so that we're not putting the burden of rationalization on people. And then people have to figure out, how do I connect all these things into a program, right?
I think, and what you're saying has triggered an important thought for me, because, I'm also responsible for culture. And I always say that you cannot change or adapt a culture if you don't adapt the processes in link to what you're trying to get to. Right. And again, this is where HR partners need to be extremely strategic, because you can say, I'll give you a very simple example. For example, if you want a culture of collaboration, and in Comp and Ben, you are giving a system where employees or salespeople are remunerated on bonus schemes, and they're competing against each other for their bonus, you're not going to have a culture of collaboration.
Right.
So that's just an example of how processes are so important to the culture of where you're trying to get to.
Yeah.
And the importance of HR in having a say in these processes.
Natalie, the other thing that I think HR has a real opportunity to add, business value is making sure that those processes and practices are appropriately cross-functional, cross-organizational. Because when you ask a business leader within her or his own domain, to look for simplification and alignment to strategy, et cetera, that's one thing. But the interoperability of, the salespeople to the engineer. I mean, because these are the new relationships, right? It's not that I'm dealing so much with people who look like me as I'm collaborating with people who are not like me. They're in a different function, they're in a different part of the organization, and yet that internal, now horizontal supply chain or knowledge chain, whatever analogy you want to use of how work flows across the organization, is really quite functional. And yet there's not clear ownership for who designs those. It seems to me that HR can at least bring the people to the table, to say this work is a lot more related now than it used to be. What do you think?
Oh, I fully agree. And this is where, again, I'm quite lucky to be part of or it is how it should be. I shouldn't say lucky because, really, in HR, we have a very important role, but I'm able to bring people at the table and having those discussions and bring different business leaders to work together. And this is, as you so adequately said, very true in terms of a digital transformation. We have to have synergies. We have to be able, our businesses need to be working together and forward with the digital team to be able to get to where we are trying to get to. So definitely.
It seems like such a simple thing to say, but it's a big idea that we're not talking about gratuitous collaboration.
Yeah.
Right, man. We're not talking about gratuitous collaboration and we all want to get along. That's really not what we're talking about. We're talking about developing new ways of working across the organization that are critical to the success that the business seeks. So, it's right up against that must-have operating model context that we were talking about before, I think.
I fully agree.
Big ideas. Natalie, I could talk to you all day, but I know that your evening is getting long and it's a Friday and I want to give you your time back, but I'd like to get one last question in if I can. When you and I spoke after we got introduced through my producer, I thought you had a great concept of the critical success factors that will enable HR's success with the kind of agendas that we're talking about here. And I asked you if you could save those to the end because I just love them as an idea. I think that people will really benefit from them. So could you share what you consider to be the critical success factors that make your agenda possible?
Absolutely. So I can share those. So one of them is strategic alignment. So we've talked a lot about the importance that the CEO has and sitting at the table. And I think that the HR strategy needs to be really aligned with the global strategy. And in order to be able to do that, you need to be very close to the business. We also need competent HR business partners, or as I like to call it, strategic HR business partners, because they are the bridge between the central HR function and the businesses and the direction in which we're going. I think we've talked also a lot today about the tech implementation and the role that leads, not only tech, but also being able to have data for decision making. So what is the data that we're going to utilize? And to have that, you are right. We need to have systems that go across. We need to have HR systems that talk to each other. Investment is key, not only in the human capital, but also in technology, in training, in all of those things. Without that investment and that key importance, then we're not able to move forward. So investment is really key. Having a collaborative operating model, also a very important part. So central HR function needs to be viewed as the partners. We need to work towards a common goal. We need to be able to, again, have that seat at the table and have an operating model that matches the operating model of the business and the strategy. That also links well to, I know that last time we talked about it, you talked about communication, because I think that being able to communicate all these things to the business in terms of the operating model, in terms of how we want to move forward, is also really, really key. And last but not least, standard versus customized. We have to balance what is standardized practice versus what can be customized in the business. And just now we talked a little bit about, sometimes things happen in the business and we don't want to create a vacuum. So we don't want to be the ones to say, no, wait, you can't do this or you can't do that because we don't have a common process yet. So we want the business to be able to do some things and have that flexibility on their own. But there are cases in HR where we absolutely have to be standardized, also to follow legal processes and to be able to be compliant. So we have to, for example, when Comp and Ben comes into play, and there's new regulations in the EU coming in 2026 with regards to how we remunerate women versus men. So we need to have some sort of standardization, but we also need to be very flexible. And that's sometimes a bit of a conundrum and a hard balance. So those would be my 6 sort of main critical success factors.
I love those. And as you said, we spoke about most of them, but the 2 that we didn't speak about directly, so I'll just put an exclamation point on them because I think they're really important, is your last one in terms of HR's ability and important catalyst role in driving enterprise common wherever enterprise common's possible. And we can pursue it. It just drives cost and complexity out of the system so that we've got the time and the bandwidth and the money to deal with necessary complexity and variability, right? Which is unavoidable, but difficult to administer. So that's a big one to me. And the last one is this idea of investments. And, I love the idea that you put it out there very plainly, Natalie, because I think in some agendas, we talk about the investment idea behind closed doors as a second idea. So here's all my great ideas and the agenda, and then I have to figure out some way to finance this. Bringing the investment piece front and center, and keeping it a part of the front of the platform, I think is critical. It's the thing that gives the other executives the opportunity to say yes or no, for it to be a credible and honest commitment, as opposed to, giving, voice to some of your ideas. So that investment piece to me seems like an important idea to be very clear about. Is that Absolutely. What you found? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's something that a lot of CHROs struggle with, to be honest.
I agree.
And I think to me that also brings the point which we didn't talk about is the relationship with the CFO, to be honest. I think that having a close, good relationship with the CFO is also key to the success of a business. Also because it's not only to get the investments, but it's also because the flexibility of the workforce is too often linked to a too strict finance organization. So the cost centers are too close. So for example, you would like to move to a different role, but the other department says, no, I don't have room in my cost center to be able to take you on. But that flexibility should be really key to be able to move the workforce around, because at the end of the day, it's mostly in the same company. So that is also really key.
I love it. Maybe I can get you back sometime to talk with us on just this issue. I think it's, what's the financial business model to support the transformative HR agenda? What is that? How do we do it? How do we get the CFO and CEO, to agree? And how do we measure it? How do we measure it and then make changes when we learn along the way that some of the advantages, productivity or otherwise, worked or didn't work? I think that alone, and to your point, as HR people, we need to be able to talk about the finance piece of this more directly. Otherwise, we're just not going to get the buy-in that we need. So I love that topic. Maybe we can have you back.
Would love to.
Natalie, you were great. Like I said, I could talk with you all day, but now it's all night on your side. So I'm going to let you go. But thank you sincerely for
thank you.
I really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much. I thought it was a really fun discussion. So I could talk about this all day, and I'm really glad you invited me. So I look forward to seeing the results.
Me too. And I hope that we can also get some folks to take a look at the company that you're working in. It's a really interesting business, and as I said, worth taking a look at the CEO as well. So Thank you again, and I hope to talk to you sometime soon. You have a great
Thank you so
weekend.
much. Okay, thank you.
See
Bye-bye.
you. Bye.